Welcome. This is Happy Childless Mindset Podcast. Welcome. I'm here with Trish Gent, and she's a Kundalini yoga instructor and an integrative life coach. How are you, Trish?
Hey Laura, how are you?
I'm good. So, Trish, you have a podcast also with
I
a
do.
friend. Do you want to talk about that a little?
Sure. So I actually am a registered nurse and have been a registered nurse for over 20 years. And I would say, the last, 5 years or so, maybe a little over 5 years is really where I started, I wouldn't say transitioning, it would say more of including and expanding my
Mm.
role into being an integrative life coach. And a lot of that was birthed through me finding and becoming a Kundalini yoga instructor. And through Kundalini yoga and my own experiences, I kept in conversations with another manager that I worked with, a nurse manager. And, she was, at a different level of her journey, we'd say, or not even level, different space in her journey. And we just, I think a couple years ago, 2 years ago or so, she was like, I feel like I want to like write a blog or, talk about all these different modalities. Because especially with how we were raised and brought up through the medical system, a lot of this was just new ways to kind of look at health and wellness. And that's when I was like, yeah, we should do a podcast. And that's actually gave us our I would say this like light up moment in both of our bodies. And we took a couple months to kind of figure out, is this something we can do, is this something we still kind of want to do, and what that looks like. And so yes, we our podcast was called the Wellness Empowerment Project, and we actually just started it over on YouTube as well. Probably just a couple of months ago. And yeah, so that is actually like our podcast started just through our own journeys of exploring health and wellness, through different modalities, and just seeing different and new things kind of come up with ourselves, because a lot of our work is a reflection of ourselves and how
Yeah.
we um, interact and meet with just ourselves and the world around us.
And as I listened to the episode where you tell your story, and to be honest, if you haven't told me you're childless, I wouldn't have guessed it. So what I'm trying to say is sometimes we identify so much with being childless that we kind of forget everything else we are. And I really love that about you, that we were talking about other things before, like, oh, I'm childless too, you know?
Yes. I think you bring up such a great point. And childless is just one, you could say, identity that people
Mm.
become attached to. And I think we all get stuck in different identities over our life that either we have given ourselves, or you could say society has given to us,
Mm.
and we have woefully accepted and then morphed into what we believe this identity is supposed to be and supposed to look like. Um, and for me, before I was, officially childless, we'll
Yeah.
say, um, and there was still, we'll say, hope, my identity was very much tied with my work. And it was my work as a nurse, it was my work as a nurse manager, it was my work as a healthcare leader. Um, and that was my whole entire identity. And for me, it was, becoming a mother was another identity that I wanted to take on. And when that did not happen, I think for me, that was one of the first shifts that I started to kind of notice in my life. And,
Mm.
just to be completely transparent, I'm looking this out over the scope of a lens of the last, uh, 10 to 12 years. In real time, it did not feel like this.
Yeah.
I would say. years, even on the end of it, it took me a long time. It wasn't until the until I broke that identity of my work being who I am, and through my work with Kundalini yoga, um, did I, or was I actually able to see how having these identities and that identity of wanting to be a mother was part of the pain and the grief that was surrounding this portion or that period in my life.
Yeah, I think something similar happened to me. I was healing mostly my anxiety, but a lot of childhood trauma and a lot of my childless grief gets so intertwined into other pain that I didn't fully recognize what it was. And when I started like recognizing the pieces and healing the pieces, it started to came up like this is not the same thing. And I want to heal that. I don't want to be I th I want to get rid of the mom identity that I'm not going to have and build something from what I'm standing now. So I completely get you. And I use, like you said, I want to tell more about Kundalini and your coaching, but I think we both got all these tools that, for healing that we also apply to childlessness, but not because there were aimed to childlessness at first.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, um, we've all experienced some sort of trauma,
Yeah.
whether it's, big T or little t. And, I grew up most of my life, I was just riddled with anxiety and
Mm.
perfectionism. And I was a proud card carrying perfectionist. I mean, let me tell you. And, I had this belief that the anxiety I had and the perfectionism I had was something that was a fixed trait. I did
Mm.
not actually think it was something that I was going to be able to change. And when you think about it, I grew up, with my father was very type A. My mother was the almost, I could say, typical, right, worrier, right? Someone's got to worry about it. And, I thought that this was, standard. I think I even had a conversation with my father about like thoughts rummaging through your head, and he kind of validated that that happens. Um, so I just thought, I'm like, okay, so everyone's like this. I just gotta like suck it up and figure out how to do it. And even in the midst of me going through our infertility story and journey, I was doing very well at work. If anything, I was excelling at work.
Yeah.
And then, at home, I was dry heaving in the bathroom every morning. So what was going on in my inner world and my outer world was a complete mismatch. And even then, I remember telling myself, I just need to figure out how to manage this better. And there really was no thought of this, that this should not be happening, that I shouldn't, it was more of like this, it's my fault, I need to manage this better. And what basically ended up happening is that I actually had to abandon a lot of my old belief systems. um in the pursuit of trying to get pregnant, and really not having a reason why we couldn't get
Yeah.
pregnant. There really was no clear reason why. And, I know my husband and I tried IUI, and it destroyed my body.
Yeah.
Um, it really did. I kind of blew up. Even a friend of mine said she hugged me, and it was like it wasn't bloat, it wasn't fat, it was just like, just like gelatinous that like came on. It totally affected my mental health. And, being someone who already had anxiety and control issues, this was probably over the top, to say the least. And, I always had like a regular cycle. And suddenly, through the IUI process, they missed my ovulation at one point and we had to go through it again. And that's when they're like, well, IVF is the only answer, really, because we're going to have to put you on birth control. And I never was on birth control a lot. And
Yeah.
I think that was something that made me first step back. And I remember saying, like, I've always been like clockwork. And then as soon as I go on these meds, I'm suddenly not like clockwork anymore. And it just made me think something was off. So
Mm.
it actually started my thought of like, well, what can I change in my environment? And I started very basic, like, oh, let's get the toxins out of like our cleaning supplies and maybe some lotions. And I just started very like small, like I'm going to make my own lotion. I'm going to make my own laundry detergent. And I was like, okay, fine. They say, do yoga and do these breathwork things and do these meditations. And I started kind of doing them at home. And I know what people aren't going to expect is that after that statement, I'm going to clearly say, and none of it worked. I actually didn't feel any different or any
Mm.
better at all. I was doing these guided meditations. Even my husband would say, he was like, I saw you doing that meditation. He goes, your head was spinning. He was like, you were not doing the meditation. And to me, I was like, but I sat down and I did it. Check. Um, but the reality is that whether it was the meditation or whether I tried to do this yoga practice at home, the end result was the same, is that sitting or laying down or this slash doing nothing was painful for me. I could not even lie down for the 5 minute savasana at the end of the yoga practice. For the first minute and a half, they would do a yoga nidra. And as soon as they stopped talking, I had another 3.5 minutes of dead silence. And to be truthfully honest, sometimes I could not even sit still for it because I would start thinking, I have all these other things to do. I'm wasting time. What am I doing?
You know, you started telling that when you check other people's, like, everyone is anxious. It was something click in my head because that happened to me too. I asked, like, my mom, is it normal to feel this nervousness and my head screaming, you're not doing enough? And yeah, so I went through life like that. So I also had that, like, I checked and it wasn't like that. And it wasn't until I started having panic attacks that I needed to change that belief system. And the same thing happened to me with meditation. I was too on fire to just sit still and do nothing, because for me I was constantly checking on my body. Everything felt like awkwardness. And so I started meditating in other ways. Like, I would doodle while I meditated, so I wasn't concentrating on anything else. Or, but I also love that you said you started small, because I did that too. The I think that since we are both anxious, the big change is too fast, is too much. So I start little and I start tweaking there, and then it feels more organic and more easy to do a big change. Like, I change homes, but I started, like, getting used to that change. I don't know if that happened to you too. I hope you're enjoying this episode. If you are, please support me so I can keep making this podcast. One way to do it is by subscribing or follow, depending on what platform you are. Okay, back to the episode.
Well, it was for me, it was more like I was throwing spaghetti against the wall because I didn't know what I was doing. Honestly, I was just like, I'm just, in my head, I was doing what I was told
Yeah,
because, we had this like script in life and I checked the boxes and I was doing everything I was told in life. And it looked like I achieved everything I should have achieved, on the outside. But on the inside, I was, crumbling. I was,
yeah,
exhausted. I had nothing left to give on the weekends. And, especially when you're going through your infertility journey, you keep thinking like, if I just get pregnant, if this one thing happens, everything's going to be fine if that just one thing. So you
Yeah.
keep hyper fixating and trying to control, um, so much because you think that that's going to be the answer. So I was still in the phase, I would say, of looking outside for the answers and looking outside
Mm.
for the response. And because you know, I was, or I am still a nurse, and I was in healthcare. Obviously, I worked as a manager. I also worked in clinical research for a number of years. And critical care was my baby. I also, kind of poo-pooed a lot of the research that was done on some of these other modalities, mostly because I was probably ignorant to know that there was research even being done on them.
Yeah.
I just thought it was too frou-frou or too chill, and I'm not a chill person, so that didn't match me. Um, and this is what I think shifted, is that I literally fell into finding Kundalini yoga one day, and they started talking about it. It was talked about as, it works on your nervous system and your glandular system. And that just piqued my interest. I was like, wait, this is fascinating. I've never heard of someone talking about how yoga can work on the nervous system and the glandular system. And it intrigued me. And the next thing I know, I actually was on my bed and I just did the practice on my bed. And it was different. It was different than any other type of yoga I've ever experienced before. Now, granted, I didn't really have a wide breadth of yoga experiences, but it was fascinating. You were focusing your eyes at certain places, like the tip of your nose. You were doing these different types of breath work. Some of it was very energizing, some of it really helped you kind of release this energy. You were pairing it with different physical practices that were very, I would say, basic. Like for
Mm.
someone who wasn't really big and flexible or anything like that, they were just very, to me, very like simple postures, were simple movements because you were actively moving in them. You weren't just holding something for a period of time. And, each one was like 1 to 3 minutes. So it was like a little burst. So for me, this was it was interesting to me. They use mantra, and and when they use their mantra, they're using it from Sanskrit. So you don't, unless you're being told the meaning of it and you're new, you're not going to know the meaning of it.
Yeah.
Which what I found helped me not kind of like psychoanalyze what I was saying. Because if you're saying something or chanting something that you don't believe in, right? If you don't believe it, you're not attached to it, and you're starting to tear it apart. So you're kind of missing then the whole point of why you're integrating that into your system.
It
So
happens to me with, there are applications that have affirmations,
yeah.
and sometimes like this one word that I don't agree with the meaning, and I can't believe it. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is not working.
I'm not a fan of affirmations, honestly, for that reason. And I think, affirmations can work, but I think affirmations are only effective when we have gotten ourselves in a very regulated space and when we've expanded ourselves to possibility and we can truly like believe that affirmation.
I do affirmations, but I wrote my affirmations myself, and I like every day I wrote them down, and I recorded a little audio that I played to myself. But they are things that I believe. It's not like I am the most wonderful woman in the world. You
Yeah.
know,
Like you're
that's not
obviously
me. My
guided meditation.
affirmations are I love myself. I look how far I've come. Things that like really touch me and reminds me that to keep going.
Mhm. Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
But yeah, so after I finished that first Kundalini class, after the class, I like sat up and I actually did the meditation afterwards. There was this like rose meditation. I did the meditation and I wasn't, I would say, as contracted as I typically was. But I
Yeah.
completed the meditation, I completed the whole thing. And afterwards, I remember sitting in my bed and thinking, I feel different. I couldn't even put the word to it because I never experienced it before, at least in like recent time. I
Yeah.
said, I feel different. I don't know what this is, but I want to feel more of it. And looking back, I would say only recently was I able to put a word to that moment. And I think what I actually felt was relief. I felt a momentary relief.
Yeah.
It's because my nervous system was for a brief moment in that regulated ventral space, which my body probably was not in for quite some time.
Yeah.
So that's really what started my Kundalini yoga journey. I started just like doing it at home on my own, figuring it out. And then I would say in about 3 months of that, I was like, I'm going to go for teacher training, and literally sat there and I was like, I don't have a yoga body. I'm not a yoga person. What the heck? And I'm like, but I just have to know more about why the heck this like is making me shift in so many ways. Like I went from the perspective of I wanted to know more because I love to learn and I love to dive into things. And so what I, essentially not even just from the teacher training, but since then, and is that, why Kundalini yoga is effective, is, I believe, is because it's a lot of nervous system regulating practices that are being done. Even the meditations are not the typical meditations that you see. The meditations, can have mantra as part of it, whether you're chanting out loud or silently to yourself. You will have certain mudras or ways that you put your hands or you're
Yeah.
moving your hands or your arms during those meditations. You'll have a specific breath that you're working with as well, and a specific eye gaze. And I think that's really what kind of helped shift it, because when you have that overactive mind, that I used to have, and that you Lisa used to have, and going to something like dead silent or just focusing on one thing, it doesn't always work.
It's too much.
It's too little. It's too little.
Yeah.
Too much of an
It's
extreme.
too much noise in my head to
It's too much of an
shut
extreme.
up.
So what I thought was effective for Kundalini yoga is that you're focusing on so many things. You're focusing on a breath, an eye gaze, possibly a posture or a movement
Yeah.
that you're physically doing, and sometimes a mantra. So, and truthfully, even though I'm focusing or doing like four different things in the midst of that meditation, your mind still is going to wander off.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing, is that no one ever clearly explains, people think that you just meditate and either you can do it or you don't. Because I was card carrying member of someone who said I can't meditate. Um, the reality is, even now, after years of doing these practices and meditating on a daily basis, sometimes I have a crappy meditation, which means my brain goes haywire and I start going down some rabbit trail.
Yeah.
And so the purpose of the meditation isn't for you to go silent. The purpose is for you to kind of sit with this and focus on what you're focusing on and being in that moment. And that's kind of part one. And part two is that when you start to recognize your brain going down the rabbit hole,
You
you
can
actually
stop it.
have, that's a moment of choice. You actually have a moment of choice of whether you allow it to go down or do you try to bring yourself back.
Yeah. I want to first I do the same, not meditating, but I do this observing my mind. That helps me a lot when I'm spiraling or going to a rabbit hole that I don't need or want to go. So it's like, what are you doing? Where are you going? Come back. We are here. We're okay. But I want to tell you that I really admire that you kept going because you said I don't have the yoga body or the and I feel like yoga has been portrayed as this thing to do in your 20s when you are slim and flexible and pretty and I love that you were able to go beyond that and recognize this is serving me and I don't care if I'm not that stereotype.
I appreciate you saying that, because I don't think we talk about that enough,
Yeah.
right? Especially then the self judgment was very real back then, and
Yeah.
very highly uber critical. I was very much in that all or nothing mentality.
Mm.
So the fact that I did something that was so audacious for me, that
Yeah.
did not fit into the identity. that I thought I would ever have, or the identity that people, gave or thought I was stepping out a lot in that moment of doing it. But I feel like it also kind of shows how much I needed it, how much I knew that this was helping me on some level, even though
Yeah.
I could not communicate it at this time.
Sometimes I feel like a lot of times we get caught in the beliefs we have. Like you said before, you thought there were like who things, or this is kind of weird because it's not scientific and it's not my body type and it's not my age and I'm trying to get pregnant, and it's so easy to lost the perspective of I need to be better, and this is a tool that is helping me do that. Let's grab it.
Yeah,
So
let's do it.
yeah, but I admire you for that because you kind of had everything against in your mind, but the representation, the is not the scientific enough. It's not like I'm trying to do something else, and it's not, maybe it's not focusing on my baby, and you were able to, yeah, but it's helping me. Let's try again and let's try to do more about it.
Yeah. I mean, you
And
could argue in a lot of ways I was hitting rock bottom, I
yeah,
mean, depending what you want that definition to look like for you. But I would say like emotionally, I would, say, and obviously from my nervous system components, I was at a rock bottom, and for me, becoming and being childless, it was the first time in my life where I did not, quote, work hard and achieve what I wanted.
yeah,
Everything else in life, it was very much ingrained in me, as it was, I think, lots of us. If you work hard and you're going to achieve this. And that's essentially what I was able to do. Everything I said I wanted
yeah,
to do, I worked hard and I did it. Um, so when that did not happen, there was no me like working harder to get
yeah,
pregnant, because it wasn't just me in there, and there was so many other factors obviously involved. But I think that's also why it hit me the way it did. It was like, wait, I've
mm,
always worked hard to get what I needed, or to get what I wanted, or what I thought I wanted, or what I was told that I wanted. And this is the first time that I may have to come to terms with the fact of I may not get this. And so what am I left with? And at the end
yeah,
of the day, you're left with yourself. And, yes, when you're childless, and you're not able to conceive that family that you desired, especially when your child is not by choice, um, you are faced with that. If I'm not going to have this, then it's just me. But what I think really is that we're all faced with this at some point in our life. I think that a lot of us that are childless, not by choice, start to face that maybe earlier in the game
yeah,
than what other people do later in the game, because it was an identity we thought we were going to capture.
mm,
And then when we realized that wasn't going to happen, then it becomes, well, you have a choice, and you could do what I did first round, which was dive harder into the work identity. But when we look at things, these identities that are either given to us or we accept, um, there a lot of those are temporary. They're temporary. And
mm,
you know I think this is also why you see these mothers, that get very attached and take on the identity of being the mother of their specific child,
yeah,
where it's very difficult for them to have conversations about anything that's not their child, because they've kind of lost that sense of self, and so they maybe feel this gap as well, but they may not feel till later on, after the kids move out, or maybe until they move far away, or something horrible happens, obviously.
yeah. I
And that's
think
an example, obviously you could say the same about someone's work, that identity of work, until they, essentially,
retire.
until they retire, or they lose a job that they identified so much with, and that was their social outlet, and now they have nothing. And our culture really perpetuates it, especially in the States, because when you meet people, it's oh, I'm a nurse, I'm a doctor, I'm a teacher. And so when we're saying that I am statement, we're like reaffirming that this is who we are and that's our
Mm.
identity. And that really captured me when I was doing teacher training in Kundalini yoga, because that is one of the shifts that they actually help try to make and release. And there's a mantra called Sat Nam, and it means I am. That is what it's broken down to. But underneath all that, it really means truth is my identity. And when you say truth is your identity, it's you're not now attaching yourself to something external. You're now attaching your identity, your I am, your truth is something that's internal and it's internal to you.
I love that because I usually, one of my affirmations is I am love. And for me, it's another way to say truth, love, light, is I'm not this body. I'm much more than just this vessel. And yeah, I have tags. I am childless. I'm doing a podcast. You can say I'm a podcaster, but it's not who I am. It's just one layer of a lot of more that I am.
Yeah. It's a way that you are showcasing yourself.
Yeah, and when I finished the conversation with you and I shut down the Zoom, I'm not a podcaster anymore. And for the rest of the day or for the rest of the week, I'm on other things. And yeah, childlessness is an ongoing thing. But you were saying a lot of mothers doesn't seem to have an identity outside their kids. And I think maybe they are also scared about it. And it's easier. I'm not saying being a mom is easy. I'm saying it's easier to get behind I'm too busy with my kids than to look inside themselves because it's hard.
And
We,
honestly, it makes them the same as us. The
yeah,
mom who's too busy with her kids, who has shed her identity, is no different than who I was, who shed my identity for my work because I was always busy.
yeah,
Because we as a culture and society, especially in America, have valued busyness over everything,
yeah,
and that if you're not busy, you're wasting your time. And all of that hyper busyness, it puts the spotlight off of you completely and it's on to other people. And it's not even that you've just had that identity of being a mother or being a nurse or being childless, whatever identity you know is, that is still external to you. But what ends
yeah,
up happening is that you underneath of that is that identity of serving others, of helping others, and you're putting all your energy outside of you and
yeah.
yourself.
I always say like I I needed to love myself and became my best friend in order to then help others, in order to then show up as my better self. Because I was a really aggressive woman, because I was angry, I was frustrated, I didn't get why the all the things that happened, why they happened to me, and then that hurt became an attack to others. And when I started healing, I started to become kinder and loving. And now I have better relationships also. So it's kind of a domino effect, you know.
Oh,
I
it completely is. It
yeah.
really is. And, there was this point in my infertility where I had this moment where I realized if I got pregnant tomorrow, it wasn't going to fix how I felt because I wasn't going to believe that I was pregnant. I wasn't going to be able to allow myself to be happy. And what
Mm,
was really happening in that moment is that my grief was just so deep from the years of the experience
mm,
that even quote getting what I wanted, I wouldn't have been able to enjoy it
yeah.
because that grief and that experience was still there. And if I've learned anything from going through Kundalini yoga, is, well, one thing I will say is that there is data out there that supports that it heals, that it works great for anxiety. There's lots of research studies out there, but it's also really aligned with quantum physics, and the emotions that we have and the thoughts also affect how our body is responding. So even though I may not have had a physical child, my body and my mind was processing this grief like I had a miscarriage, like there was a
Mm.
loss. Because every month I still had this hope that I was going to be pregnant. There was still this hope that something was going to happen. We
Yeah,
even went through the adoption process. And, some people are like, yes, you need to act like this is going to work. And you get a room set up. And so you still have this, you try to do these things to get this hope. But then when you have this disappointment, month after month after month, even though you may not physically have said, oh, I physically got pregnant and lost a child, you still have experienced the grief of
yeah,
losing a child month after month after month. And
yeah,
our thoughts and our emotions do affect our body and our mind. It's a loop. Our
yeah,
body communicates to our mind communicates to our body. Actually, our heart communicates to our brain more than the brain communicates to the body. So, if we're wondering why we cannot talk ourselves out of something, it's because your body's not feeling safe yet. And sometimes we need to start with the body and have the body feel safe, have the body work through that nerve, work with your nervous system, create the safety in your body, and then you can start to reshape the brain and how we look at things, our perception of things. And then we can actually open ourselves to the realm of possibility, which then changes our behavior and the actions and the way we are interacting in that world.
yeah. I kind of had to skip the part of my body. I had to mentally convince myself I was safe because I couldn't let go of the feeling of being unsafe. But yeah, I noticed the change in my body after I realized, okay, no one is hurting me in the space I am now.
Yeah.
And
And you may not, everyone may not say, like, oh, I don't feel unsafe, but your body feels unsafe.
yeah, but I'm
Your
over
brain
vigilant.
consciously does not say the word safe. If you're in that sympathetic mode, that fight or flight and that anxiety, or if you're in that dorsal and that immobilization state where
Yeah,
you're like stressing, you're feeling unsafe
yeah,
or your body is unsafe. Whether or not you may be mentally saying that or thinking that, your body is showing it and expressing it in its way.
yeah, but I was so hyper vigilant for my first 18 years that until I was like in my 30s, I didn't realize, okay, I can like relax. I had I don't know how to say it in English, but when you press your teeth, sleeping,
Oh, grinding. Me too.
grinding.
Me too. I
I
also
was,
got myself a night guard. Uh,
yeah, and I needed to like have long conversations with myself that it's okay, you can let go, you're not going back. And and then my body started to relax. And then my thoughts became more, oh, this is good. And now I feel my body better now at my 43 that it was at my 20s, honestly.
oh,
And
agree 100%. I was, in a lot of ways, I would say I was disconnected from my body. I was all brain. And people would tell me, oh, you're all brain, but, you're being told that as like a very positive thing. I was not, I didn't know how my body felt. Like
yeah,
there was no feeling in my body. It was essentially like numb because I just over processed everything in my head. Um, but really, when I looking back, obviously in real time. I didn't see any of this. This is more, reflective. That was like, yes, it's like what I did is that when I was doing all that yoga, I was slowly creating safety within my body. And, therefore, also allowing that safety in my brain to kind of emerge. I
Yeah.
don't even think I realized the anxiety dissipated until about 6 months into teacher training. And they're like, what have you noticed? And I was like, wait, my anxiety is not there anymore. What the heck? Like, this is weird. And that's what it was. It was weird. It was weird to start navigating the world not in this perpetual state of hypervigilance. And it was like, so what do I do now? Like,
Yeah, that happened to me too. It's like,
but it gave me the
yeah,
ability then to actually have the experience of anxiety by itself in isolation, which eventually of course happened because we're human and it does. And then I was able to actually like work through it in a very conscious way, as
yeah,
opposed to like before it was very much this. I would say I probably had this like victim mentality of like, oh, there's nothing I can do about it, we just have to deal with it, and this external situation needs to hurry up and change for me to feel better. Whereas this time it was, I felt the anxiety and I noted it because there was actual shift in my body. Before I never noticed any shift because I think it was just in that state constantly. And then I was able, I was at work, so I wasn't in a space to get into my body. So I started with my mind. I started saying like, there's really no reason to be anxious about this. Like, and because there really wasn't, I was thinking about shifting an agency. So it was like, you already have a job, you're not going to lose the job you have. You know what I mean? It's just, you just think this may be a better fit for you, it may be, better financially. And I went through that in my mind, and what I realized is that nothing shifted in my body. But because I had that awareness, I stopped myself from doing the patterns that I would typically do before, which would be like send another email, make another phone call, like hurry up the outside world to give me my answer. But what that told me is that there was still my body, still was carrying some old, energetic, residual, you know,
yeah,
you could say, if you want to say trauma or an experience that was still held in my body that was being reflected through my nervous system and presenting itself as anxiety. So, when I got home, I worked with my body and everything ended up, completely fine and well. But that was like the first taste of actually being able to consciously work with myself and now actually start to change those behaviors that we have in a very conscious way.
yeah. I went through the same. I still have anxiety because I reach a point of too too much anxiety, but I feel like I work through a lot of things, situations more that I wouldn't be able to do 2 years ago, and now I'm doing them. But I had that dialogue that you are saying, like, what am I feeling? I don't have nothing to worry about. I am safe. And then it's like, okay, I convince my brain now I can relax my body too and let go. But
Yeah. But
it's
it's the
so,
that awareness of like, okay, what can I do now? Like I couldn't get
yeah,
into my body. So, and everything I said logically was completely true. Like my brain wasn't like, that's bullshit. No, my brain was like, no, that's true.
yeah,
And when I noticed it wasn't shifting in my body, it was like, okay, I still have some, energetic residual of, going through these experiences before
yeah,
that is still being present in my body and showing up. But you're right. Like over time, I say I don't identify as having anxiety. I had an experience with anxiety, which is what I just shared. It was an experience with it, but I don't necessarily have anxiety anymore, especially not in the way that I used to. And the way you put it was nice. The nervous system way of it is that we build resilience, we build the capacity in our system. So the more that we can shift our body into that ventral connected state in the nervous system, we will start to build our window of tolerance. So when
yeah,
I said in the beginning, I did that first practice and I felt this momentary relief, or this, and I didn't even know what it was, but eventually it was relief. That relief was that moment that I actually was in that ventral state for a little bit. But over time and doing those practices is that what has happened is that my that little like window, that blip started to get a little bit bigger and bigger. And that is that space in the ventral states. And it started to get bigger and bigger. And then as it gets larger, you have a more of a capacity. So what is happening, if you look at it like a pendulum, that's happening is that that pendulum before was swinging all the way on this side. It never like
Yeah.
touched this side because it was all, it was a blip that it was in. But then once you kind of move it, that pendulum is now swinging, and it can be swinging most of the time. You could be, if you have a larger capacity, it's be swinging mostly in that capacity. So what that means is that not only is your body, you can handle more in the sense of like your body has the capacity to handle more things that are quote outside your perception of control, because you've created that trust within yourself, within your
Mm.
body, within your mind. And so it doesn't mean you're never going to experience outside of those realms. Yes, you will. A healthy nervous system is a flexible nervous system, but it's the ability to recognize now when you're going outside of those bounds and then having the tools and the awareness of how to bring yourself back in.
I completely love the pendulum metaphor because I feel like that. I feel like now I'm relaxed most of the time. And yeah, I'm started, but I don't reach the point where I have a panic attack. I feel it coming and I can identify it because I'm relaxed. But before I was so anxious all the time that the panic attack happened. And it was like, it came from nowhere. No, it's not from nowhere. No, but
Yeah, and I would like to think also another way of visual to describe it is I like to use the dimmer switch. You know, those dimmer switches
yeah,
that go up and down. So if you're in those panic attack, you're like that dimmer switch is like super high. It's to the top. The lights are flickering, like they're about to go out because they're overcharged with energy, right?
yeah,
So that's that like sympathetic state. And then on the other extreme, that's that dorsal state where it's like it's completely like dark,
dark.
and
Yeah,
maybe there's like a glimmer of light in there, but essentially there's like no energy. You're completely, off put. And that ventral state is that the dimmer switch is in the middle. You can see everything that you need to see clearly. You have the light that you need. Nothing is, going haywire because there's too much energy going through or too little energy. It's right at that middle piece.
yeah, I love that. I I don't think balance is something that it's constant. I think we get ourselves into that balance all the time. And also it happens with the dim light and the pendulum. I feel like we reach a point, you and I, where we have self-aware to get back to the middle when we are getting out of that balance.
Yeah. And, it reminds me too, when I was working as a manager, we had someone come and talk, and they talked about work life balance because that was always the tagline that we always heard about, work life balance. Um, and we were all told, you take a bath, read a non nursing journal, and, we do those things. And I'm like, I don't feel any better. And obviously now I
Yeah.
know that it's because I was dysregulated, and those are nice things to do, but they were not nervous system regulating activities for me to do at that time. But when they talked about work life balance, the problem with it really was is that we're trying to separate work from life. And the thing is, work is a part of life.
Yeah.
And the question is that how do you want work to be a part of your life? And maybe instead of working in balance, we need to start working in harmony.
Yeah, love that.
And our work be a harmonious part of our life and not this like separate entity in the corner that you're just trying to like tame a beast.
Yeah, and this is you have to, at least until you retire, you have to do kind of every day. So get like instead of taming,
Retire.
befriend it.
My thoughts of retirement have completely changed too. Like, why are we going to work our whole life to spend like 20 years in retirement and do what? I think there is something to be said about mentally and physically engaging yourself with, some sort of community, on a
Mm.
routine basis. to make sure you still have some sort of sense of purpose and whatever that purpose can look like. And, especially as we're childless women, our purpose may not be, spending
Being
time
a
with our
grandma.
grandkids,
Yeah.
which, my mother's is with my nephews, and that's wonderful. But where else are we going to find purpose in our life? And that's something that I know we don't talk a lot about is what happens after retirement, and what's still that purpose? What's going to light you up? And I think there's nothing wrong with redefining your relationship with not just work, but whatever activities you do in your life, to make them harmonious, to make it
Yeah.
joyful, make yourself feel prosperous in your own rights. And it doesn't mean you have to just do the typical sit on the beach when you retire. Like, it could look like whatever you want it to. I just did CPR certification this morning, and the guy said, he goes, "Yeah, I'm retired, and this is what I do in my retirement." He's like, "Sometimes I'll take 3 weeks off and go on a vacation." He was like, "But other times, like, yeah, he drove up, hour and a half to, teach all these classes for 2 or 3 days."
Yeah. I love that. I think I have a kind of an idea what I want to do when I'm retired, but I also like there are purposes. I want to have a community and I want to rescue animals and that doesn't dry up.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of the key, it's like
Yes, it
to
is the key. It is, because if you have one thing, and think about it, right? If you're that person who your whole life is work, and I keep saying this because that's what reflected with me, especially when
Mm.
children was not the option. It became work even more than it was before. Um, Eventually, that work isn't going to be there,
Yeah.
and you're still left with yourself. And I do see this. I see this with with people who they work their whole life and they didn't actually like stop working, mostly probably because they had to, because they're in their 70s and it was time.
Mm.
But then they're like, well, now what do I do?
Yeah, and kind of that happened to my mom. She has a kid and she was so work driven that she a lot of time neglected me and now we don't have a relationship. Don't have a good relationship. We have a relationship, but uh it's complicated. And it's like, I'm retired. Why don't you come visit me? Sorry. And why don't you come visit me? Because now I'm doing something else and I wasn't a priority for you. So
Yeah,
it's,
see,
and
my
I,
but my father-in-law is, similar in the sense that, like, he's in his 70s and he just stopped working like within this last year, mostly because he just physically couldn't keep doing it anymore. He did a lot of hard work. And now that he's home, he doesn't, know what to do with himself. And,
yeah,
I'm hearing that, he's miserable, he's complaining. And it's because, though, that was his outlet.
yeah,
He allowed work to be his only outlet, for his social engagements, his physical engagement, probably his emotional, like everything was tied up in going to work and doing these physical duties, and a lot of the physical duties that he now can't even do at home. So it's like, well, how else are we going to engage with ourselves? How else do we want to engage, in life?
yeah. My mom didn't process my dad death. And it's not like I don't love her. I love her, but I don't feel like I have to be with her just because she retired. And now she's started to get a self, a sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I don't know, I'm grateful that I was able to start earlier. It can be because I'm childless, it can be because I have anxiety, but it's because I needed to. And I get to be happy earlier if I sort of speak.
Yeah, no, and I listen. I don't want to be the person who's like, being childless is a blessing.
No.
No, things things happen in all of our lives. And the
Yeah.
question is that are we taking this as an opportunity for us to kind of shift into a higher version of ourselves, or are we going to allow it to kind of tear us down? And the reality is, all of us who have been childless, not by choice, we're at that point, and we were at one point made the decision to allow us to tear
Yeah.
it down, because that's only the time where then you can say, okay, I need this to help pull me out. And yes, from a time perspective, it maybe does happen sooner than it does other people as well.
Yeah.
If anything, I think that the emotions and the experiences behind it are similar to other experiences out there. It's just not talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. But I did an interview recently, and I said like I felt that I had this sand, that this castle made of sand, and it was motherhood, and it didn't become to be. So I turned down that castle, and I cried and I was angry and a lot of things, but it made me have the clean slate to, okay, I'm building something else because I don't want to have those just just sand without anything else. And yeah, it's not a blessing to be childless, but I choose to look at the possibilities I do have now instead of dwelling.
Perfectly said.
Before we finish, is there anything else you want to say? Where people can find you, it's going to be linked in the
Sure.
description, but
Yeah. So, I'm not the biggest social media person, I'll be honest with you, but I am over on Instagram on coach_Trish Gents. We do have a podcast called the Wellness Empowerment Project. We're on Spotify, Apple, and recently up on YouTube as well. And otherwise, I will drop, I have a freebie called Kundalini to Calm Anxiety. I do talk to my email list pretty routinely, so that's a great way to get on. And if anyone is, struggling with the perfectionism and wants, to see or learn more on how to regulate our nervous system, I have a small offer called The Pathway. It's a mini course that you can kind of do in your own time as well, and I'll drop that link in the show notes too.
great. It was a pleasure having you here, and thank you very much.
So good talking to you, Laura. Thank you.